Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to today's Irish Tale. Well, it's not a tale as much as it is more history, as it is Irish History Month, and today we're going to look at the Irish harp. So, smash that subscribe button, sit back, enjoy a horn of mead, and enjoy today's lesson about the Irish harp and its place in Ireland's history. It is said the music heard in heaven is the golden sound of harps. Today, the harp has an aura of mystery because the average person has never really seen a real pedal harp except at, the symphony, and has never heard of an Irish harp. For several hundred years, since Henry VIII, the Irish have used a harp as their emblem. Modern coins depict the 14th century Trinity College harp. In ancient times, the wire string harp was an instrument of the aristocratic class, as well as the most loved instrument of the Irish people. Today, some class as a folk instrument because of its original methods of building and playing it were lost. Extended political turmoil in Ireland, and there's been little general interest in it for years. Recently, however, the wire string harp has been rediscovered. In ancient times, harpers were the counselors of kings. They were the golden chair of honor, titles, and wealth for their services. These benefits were not inherited by their children, but went to the best harper in Ireland. The harpers were consulted before going to war and often led the troops to battle with harp and sword, singing of victory and slaying his share of the enemy. His harp was often heavily decorated and highly revered. All Irish Gaelic people like to decorate their harps with intricate carving and crystals. Chiefs and kings added fancy gold around the silver ornamentation and jewels and often created priceless treasures. Old Celtic harps were played with a different technique than is used for pedal harps. They were traditionally held against the left shoulder, the left hand playing the upper strings, and the right hand the lower strings. Today, harps are held against the right shoulder and the hands are played in reversed positions. The old harps were strung with thick brass wires and plucked with long, crooked fingernails resembled quills. These harps had a loud, full, rich, bell-like sound. The upper strings, often a thin steel wire, had a sweet tinkling sound. The bass register could growl and roar. The sound of old harps would ring for a long time, so sometimes the strings were stopped to provide clarity of tone and to muddied fast passage. In his book, The Irish and Highland Harps, Robert Bruce Armstrong described the playing technique of the Highland harp. Prolonged vibration of wired strings required to be immediately dampened or stopped. Thus, as soon as a finger pulled a string, another finger stopped the vibration. And when the performer of the harp was proficient, no jarring of strings against the fingernails was heard. The Irish Gaelic word for string harp is clairseach and was used throughout Ireland and Scotland. Harp was a word denoting sinew-stringed instruments. Now, let's look at the ancient harp. The various forms of the harp have begun around on most of the continents of the world since before written history, and nothing is known about this remote origins. However, there is a record of a form of harp which exists 2 to about 3,000 years ago in Central Asia and Siberia, which is reminiscent of an old Irish harp. Burial chambers of Ur in Mesopotamia, which date back from the middle to about the 3rd millennium BC, contained 3 harp-like instruments. Engravings of singers and musicians played stringed instruments in a festive and drinking scenes. This suggests that there was a common practice in Sumerian civilization. Irish bards and harpers of the 16th century were heir not only to the ancient tradition of sketching back pre-Christian Ireland, but to where its roots lie in the earliest Bronze Age civilization. Harp-like instruments found in Greece, China, Eurasia, Persia, and Egypt were too large to carry. And while they don't appear to have influenced early Irish harps, there may have been influenced later changes throughout the appearance in Ireland of Christian travelers. But certain small portable harps seem to have, originated among the barbarian peoples of Asia. The Irish Celtic harp resembles this instrument more than any other ancient harp. The harp in early legend. Legends from around the end of the pre-Christian era tell of a person named Craftil who was mentioned in several sources as a harper and harp maker. Another legendary feature, Conner Mór, was said to have 3 poets, 9 pipers, 9 harpers, and his routine according to Irish antiquarian Professor O'Curley. Also, if you remember, the dagda also is associated with the harp, and so is lute. As these legends shown, the tradition of the early Celtic harp can be traced back over 1,000 years. The earliest representation of harps were found sculpted on stones in Scotland, dating from the 8th or 9th century. By the year 1000, early forms of harp were widespread all over Ireland, Wales, and Scotland. The reign of the harp in music of the British Isles was noted by learned Europeans. These early writings span several hundred years and hint at a marvelous music which was lost. For example, Podvil Vilja, who lived in England during the first half of the 16th century, states that the Irish practice music and are extremely skilled in it. Their performance, both vocal and instrumental, is exquisite, but so bold and impassionate that it is amazed how they can observe the rules of their art amidst such rapid evolutions of the fingers and vibrations of the voice. And yet they do observe them to perfection. And this comes from the Cambres Everest volume IP page 311. However, all reigns of glory must come to an end. After hundreds of years successfully fighting off and absorbing waves of intruders such as the Vikings, Romans, Normans, and Moors, the English started to become a problem to the Irish and their culture. The Irish were well used to the invasions of foreigners, and in 1395, according to the old records, 4 Irish kings submitted to the English, after, of course, an arduous fight. However, that was not enough. The English insisted that the Irish barbarians adopt the English customs as well. For example, it was an English custom for the king, his minstrels, harpers, and main servants to share table, plate, and cup together. The English stated this barbaric custom must be replaced by table manners of England, where musicians sat separately and the servants sat still further away. According to the record, the Irish complied, at least when the Englishmen were present. Now comes the not-so-nice time for the Celtic harp. The next 200 years brought increasing pressure from English, which included the Protestantation of the Catholic Ireland. Gradually, the power of the Irish princes was eroded away, and this in turn ended the patronage of Ireland's bards and harpers towards the end of approximately the 16th century. Meanwhile, in Scotland, during the same period, Highland harpers enjoyed prosperity according to the King's Treasury records. Many Scottish kings were musicians, and they employed many other musicians at their court. For example, during the reign of James IV, we find he was currently fond of music, and there were frequent notices of harps and clairshaches, as well as many other instruments. Armstrong, the Irish and Highland harp, that's where that passage comes from, an especially musical period, according to the records, occurred from approximately 1494 to about 1503. Of 20 entries of payment of musicians, half were the large company of harpers and minstrels who performed for the New Year's celebrations, which after Christianity took over would be our present day New Year's. Before, it would have been Simonia's. The harpers were able to maintain their lifestyle through the end of the 16th century, although during the last part of this period, potential harpers had to be trained abroad at burghs. Finally, according to Manson in his Highland bagpipe, in Scotland, the use of the harp came to an end with the pop of the feudal system. Harpers and bards in Ireland began to be personally harassed by the English crown in the early 1500s, and many were imprisoned as troublemakers or even executed. Records show only the number of pardons. All the other unlucky harpers are lost to anonymity. Ironically, while Queen Elizabeth I was enjoying Irish dances performed at her court in London by her harper, she used a proclamation to Lord Barrymore in Ireland to hang harpers wherever found and destroy their instruments. As a testament to the Irish harping, however, just 2 months after Queen Elizabeth I's death in 1603, Lord Barrymore's records show that he had a harper in his household. Times grew harder still for harps and harpers between 1650 and 1660, when Cromwell ordered the destruction of harps and organs in both Catholic and Protestant circles. 500 harps were confiscated and burned in the city of Dublin alone. In another instant, 2,000 others were destroyed, and harpers were forbidden to congregate. Through the 17th and 18th centuries, drastic changes in the life of the Irish people occurred. Music and poetry in the ancient fashion were encouraged less and less, and all the old patrons were in exile or had lost their wealth. Their deliberate destruction of harps and harpers ended after Cromwell. Harps and minstrels once had the ear of the kings. They were forced to travel from place to place and beg a living where they could. For a time, the harp disappeared. Many non-Irish peoples, including soldiers who didn't go home, settled in Ireland. Their traditional music came with them. It was intermixed with Irish music. New musical knowledge and techniques were developed in Europe and imported to the British Isles, including the use of pedal harp. With its sinew strings and soft sound, musical fashions gradually changed, and the traditional sound and style of the wire-strung harp did not fit in well. Many tunes were rewritten for the fiddle and other instruments because the public favored modern settings. Now, in the late 1700s, the townspeople in Ireland began to develop an increasing interest in their long-neglected national heritage. By this time, there were very few harpers left, and little music was still played in the traditional way. In the year 1790, the Belfast Harp Meeting was organized to promote old music. Harpers were invited to come and compete for prize. Only 10 harpers ranging in age from 15 to 97 showed up. The oldest, Dennis Hempson, at 97, was the only harper to play in the old style with the fingernails. All others plays with their fingertips. This could possibly have been due to the influence of the new pedal harp with gut strings. At the meeting, the opportunity was taken to copy many old tunes down as they were played. Edward Bunting, the copyist, had not been trained in, traditional ways, so he was unable to reproduce what was played completely accurately, and at the last chance for complete preservation slipped away. No traditional wire-strung Irish harps have been made for a long time. There was little demand, probably because the life of harpers had become so difficult for so long due to the adverse social and political situation. So the method was lost. There was little harp playing in Ireland after the beginning of the 1800s. Social conditions were very bad, and Irish energies were directed towards more fundamental needs. Schools were started in Belfast and Dublin in early 1800s to teach poor blind boys to be harpers. Well, that failed. The traditional style of playing had been long gone away and replaced with fingertip playing. The Neo-Irish harp. During the, 1890s and early 1900s, some small harps were made in Ireland, but they only vaguely resembled the ancient harp, with its big, glorious sound. Joan Rimmer says in her book, The Irish Harp, that it can only be described as a nightmare parody of the Irish harp, that their tone is particularly unattractive, rather that of an ancient and decrepit piano. The pedal harp became more of an interest over the years. And although small harps were still made and played in Ireland, the wonderful resonant sound was unavailable and very few played seriously. This unhappy condition lasted almost 200 years. About 10 years ago, a feat of modern engineering produced methods to build very resonant, small, wire-string Celtic harps with a very sweet sound. These harps are a successful continuation of the ancient Irish tradition. There are two basic sizes. The smallest lap harp, which is extremely lightweight and portable. It is so small enough that it can be played in a car and is an excellent size for a beginning harp for children. There's also a small neon string harps with pedal harp spacing, but made them ideal travel and practice harp for professional harpists. Recently developed models, both wire and nylon string styles, have astonishingly large sorority but their size. The intermediate size harp, which is about 3 to 4 feet tall, also carries both wire and nylon strings. They weigh about 35 to 50 pounds and fit easily in the trunk or back seat of an average car. These also have 2 full range in the bass, which makes them suitable for professional performing. Due to the exciting new sound, there are now several musician groups that are using the small harp regularly in their arrangements. Perhaps this is the beginning of a golden age for the harp. You also have to remember that the Irish harp is the official symbol of Ireland. It's not the shamrock, how most people think, but it is the Irish harp. And if you look on the Irish flag, the old Irish flag, it is of a harp with the words Erin go Bra under it, and that means Ireland forever. And these are 2 songs played with the Irish harp. This one is also played with the tin whistle.